actually, it's kind of not so usual in startup conferences. The first session is investors, and we're like in the middle of the afternoon. We already have like bankers and the corporate development people. So it's a little bit unusual. But also we're going to talk about a topic that's probably not also that common, because of course investors love to talk about their exits, but they rarely talk about how they happen, what was their role, what went right, what went wrong, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So maybe to get started, Shahin, if you want to tell us more about Lux Capital, what you guys do, your areas of focus, your stage, so people get a picture of the type of investor you are.
Sure, we're a venture capital firm, traditional, based in Menlo Park in New York, with about 9 partners. We focus on great founders like yourselves, building amazing companies that are some kind of unique technology, building or dominating massive markets. I joined the firm about 12 years ago. I've led our investments in rockets, satellites, driverless cars, manufacturing automation, robotics, AI, semiconductors, and we do seed to Series A, sometimes Series B investments. So check sizes can be a couple $100K to get a company off the ground, to say $10, $15 million to lead an early institutional round. And we are long-term partners with our company to set aside $10 to $25 million per company to carry it all the way through to a massive multi-billion-dollar outcome.
All right. Ammar, tell us about Moment Ventures.
Well, the afternoon slot is always a tough one, but at least it's not the last one before coffee. That's a good thing. So I started Moment Ventures 5 years ago with a couple of partners. We're an early stage fund. We like to say that we invest in the first institutional round. Nomenclature has gotten so fuzzy these days. So as I like to say, whenever somebody who's not family is investing in your company, that's the right time to talk to us. When you're sort of approaching a business and a product with this idea of how to get something off the ground in customers' hands, a dozen customers using it. Check sizes for us, we're raising Fund 2. It's going to be a $50 million fund, so we're writing much smaller checks than Shahin is. But we think for us, we like that structure, we like to be in that stage, so it's $300 million to $2 million into a company to start with. My background before that was actually a much larger fund. It was a $370 million fund. I was writing much bigger checks, and we can talk more about why we chose the structure we did. But one of the things I always think about as entrepreneurs, they always spend as much money as you invest. So that's one of the questions, is how much should you invest and how much should you raise is an important question. And finally, as a venture capitalist, my background is really informed by my time at Cisco Systems. I was there for 8 years, from 97 to 2005. I ran corporate development. I was on the other side of lots of great investments and investors, selling companies, and was involved in over 100 transactions there. So tell me more about that as well.
So actually that's kind of interesting, because you guys have really kind of a very early stage fund, somewhat similar stage to us, even though we're like pre-seed, we start pre-seed, then we go to seed, then up to Series A. So it takes quite a while from that stage to get exits, but since you were also on the other side of the table, it's really good to have you to talk about that experience. We actually had a gentleman from Cisco this morning talk about his experience selling his company to Cisco, and then understanding more about the context side. But your fund has been around for a lot longer, like 12 years is enough to actually, so especially at the stage you're at, to get some exits. Can you tell us a bit about what happened to your portfolio, particularly with the early companies, and what kind of outcomes you saw?
So we got lucky, to say the least. So the trick really in venture is to position yourself to get lucky. We have the fortune of working with some amazing founders who built amazing teams that built something that somebody found valuable. I can share the case of Nirvana. They were one of the early companies doing AI-specific chips. They were very early to demonstrate some really interesting capability. They found a creative way to make themselves known to a very broad audience about what kind of power their technology can bring to bear. Their chip wasn't even ready yet, and they had a tool that developers could use to build out different deep networks, and they gained some level of traction that basically put them on Intel's radar, and Intel basically acquired the company even before they had their first chip ready. So I think it's really important for you guys as founders to think about what customers you want to go after and find creative ways to make those customers aware of you. And only good things can happen from there. In the case of Nirvana, Intel wanted to get access to that community. Intel is a CPU embedded chip, company, server chips, and this whole AI thing was new to them. And they found Nirvana as a vehicle to get them into that market. And Nirvana was able to position itself very early with distribution into that population that Intel wanted access to, and that led to a very straightforward value proposition for them. Again, in lieu of that technology actually being proven. So we can talk about this as the session progresses, but it's not just about building a shiny object. You guys should be thinking about as founders of hardware companies.
Just to add on that a little bit, we actually, this second fund that we're raising now, the first fund was raised in 2013, and we've been fortunate. We've actually had 7 exits out of a portfolio of 20 companies.
Even though you're so early stage.
Yeah, even though it's really, we started investing in 2013, so some of those companies were started a little earlier, but we've actually been, as I like to say, knock on wood, we've been relatively fortunate in that we've had good teams and technologies that are valuable to people. The reality is they're not all extraordinary exits. Some of them have been great outcomes for the teams, good solid returns of capital for the investors. But on the other hand, we've also had some really nice exits like for you guys. We were involved in NetSil, which is a company that was bought by Nutanix earlier this year, and that was after 2.5 years. So one thing, just to build on what Shahin said, I think, is you actually have to think about M&A and partnerships and relationships as part of the process of building a company. It's not antithetical to sort of building a great venture-backed startup to be thinking about how you're going to fit inside the ecosystem as potentially part of another company. Because the reality is 80% of you founders, or 80 to 90% of your exits, if they're going to be successful exits, are going to be through M&A. And that's only going to happen if you know the people that you're going to be potentially be part of. So it's really important to keep that thought in your head as you build your business. So we can talk more about that as we go on.
So Shahin, what kind of variety of exits have you seen, and what across your portfolio? Like, was it mostly M&A? Did you have IPOs?
We've had a
corporate or PE?
Yeah, we had a pretty good mix. So we've had traditional corporate M&A, and we've had a handful of public offerings. I think it's important, to your point, Ammar, to be mindful of the market that you're selling into. So if you expect to go public, then it's really about getting those large institutional buyers of your IPO shares aware of your company and excited about your company. And so, as Ammar was talking about, how you would fit in their portfolios. And that's a lot harder to think about at this stage. Granted, our companies that went public were primarily in the therapeutic space. So in therapeutics, it's very, like, you take a compound through certain levels of clinical trials, and it's pretty well understood as to how you fit as it relates to an IPO. It's very different for you guys in the audience. How many of you guys are doing drug companies? I would assume none or very little. Okay, one. So you have a very clear path in front of you as to how to get in front of those public market investors. It's very different for hardware companies. And so I think it's good to be, and I think Ammar might disagree with me on this, but I think it's worthwhile to be mindful of where you plan to go, focusing where the ball is going to land. But as a startup founder, you're very limited in terms of cycles. As a startup founder, you're probably spending 90% of your time recruiting, and whatever is left, trying to solve whatever problem it is you're solving. So you even think about, okay, what's Cisco doing? What's Microsoft doing? What's Intel doing? Reading analyst reports and S1s. I think you don't have a whole lot of time for that. But you should be mindful of what they would be looking for. And a couple of things that immediately come to mind for me are access to the talent base that you're building. Do you have access to talent that they otherwise would not have access to in your organization? Are you building distribution to a customer base that they otherwise do not have access to? So if they were to throw massive amounts of money at that, would they basically get a steal by purchasing you guys to have access to that distribution? Or are you building a brand, building some kind of awareness that would be hugely accretive to that company? Like in the case of Cruise, for example, GM, but with this acquisition of Cruise and getting into the driverless car race, was able to give it a nice boost to its own share price. And so that brand, the fact that there was a team in Silicon Valley that was successfully building driverless cars, now how mature it was, I'm sure it was very mature and it was amazing technology, but just the brand itself, the effort itself, was something that was extremely accretive to the company, perhaps even more so than the $1 billion or whatever it was that they spent to buy it. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think Shahin's right. Your time is limited as a founder, so you've got a lot of things that you have to do with it. That's why you get paid big bucks, right, as founders. But the reality is, I think it's really important to have some sense of this ecosystem you live in. I don't know how it just is. It's it's the customers you sell to. So you have 50 customers to focus on. Which ones does your industry care about, right? So when I was at Cisco for a long time, the financials matter a lot to Cisco in the networking business. If you were successfully sell their technology to the financial sector, that meant a lot to potential buyers in that sector because those were seen as leading edge customers, and they made you better as a company as well because you were selling to leading edge customers. Similarly, thinking about how do you go to market? Often startups have to be constrained about how they go to market potentially because you don't have that many resources. Think about who you partner with. How is that going to play out for you and otherwise? So I just think it's something that you have to be cognizant, and I agree that you don't want to do things that are orthogonal to your day job, but you can find things that line up with your day job as well as things that can help you position yourself for that eventual outcome as well.
I think, I don't know if you have the same question for those of you who have been here the whole day, but starting to be some convergence of opinions about the fact that you need to basically prepare early, years in advance of any transaction, that you need to be aware of your ecosystem, you need to build those relationships, you need to be very strategic about partnerships you establish as potential leads to acquisitions, and you need to keep your finger on the pulse of the strategy of those potential buyers. So actually thinking about the companies in the portfolio and their founders, how many of them did you feel were really quite strategic and deliberate about this approach, and how many are more kind of stumbled upon an opportunity? Maybe Shahin, if you want to start.
So I think in every M&A case that I was fortunate enough to be part of, it was pretty serendipitous. And to the earlier comment that I made, it wasn't pure luck. It was founders who were very effective at telling a story, and when they were presented the chance to share that story, in the case of Naveen with Nirvana, it was one drink with the CEO of Intel. He was able to, in a few minutes, communicate what he built, why it was important, and I guess in a subtle way, why Intel should own this.
Which leads us to the question, how do you get to have that one drink with CEO of Intel? Because I haven't had that.
So he got lucky. So he was lucky enough to have that one drink, but I can tell you that I have many CEOs in my own portfolio that I've backed that will never be able to do what he did, what Naveen was able to do. So I think it's very important for you guys as founders to be able to very concisely communicate why what you're doing would matter to those players. So for Ammar, like 10 years ago, 11 years ago, well, longer, 15 years ago at Cisco, he was looking for certain things, and to be able to communicate a narrative, a message that resonates, I think is very important. And as you guys go out and meet with seed investors, Series A investors, you are in effect doing that. And so it's important to start practicing right now. In fact, even before you talk to these investors, you are recruiting talents. You are recruiting people that are better than you. My expectation from my founders is to recruit people that are better than them. And you'll only be able to do that by being able to package and communicate the story and make sure that it resonates towards a decision for someone to take a bet on you in lieu of there being any kind of real hard data. Because the reality is that as a startup, you will not be able to go into millions of units of production and increase your margins to 90% or whatever and be able to achieve X, Y, and Z. That's not going to happen. You will give up 90% of your companies, 100% of your companies practically, if you ever want to show actual proof. You need to convince someone to take a leap of faith on you. And that all comes with how you communicate the value of what you're building. And that's why not everybody is a successful startup and an entrepreneur. That's why I'm not. That's why I'm sitting on stage here, not in the audience, because I'm bad at that. You guys are good at that.
No, the ability to communicate effectively has been mentioned, and I think it's really a good point. But I think another challenging aspect is how do you get to be in front of the right people to actually tell that story? And that's something that people don't necessarily talk much about, because it sounds like, oh, so one day he was having a drink with CEO of Intel. Well, how did that happen, right? So that's kind of the aspect, that aspect I'm interested.
I mean, I think it's a good question, but I think some of it is just really a question of perspective. So, Naveen, it sounds like was the right person to take advantage of the opportunity he had then, and it came at the right time. I was thinking about your question. Otherwise, before that is, we had one of our great outcomes was with a guy and a company where the initial introduction to the potential buyer happened 18 months before the deal was completed. The executives changed along the way. I mean, the people actually changed, but the interest actually developed further. And it happened to be a very patient acquirer, right? And in that situation, the introduction actually came from us. We knew the executive who made that happen. But it's your question first was, how strategic have people been? So the first time we brought this idea up with his founder and said, yeah, you should go meet this guy because he sounds like he's interested in what you're doing. He said, why do I want to meet with him? He's not. I'm in stealth. I'm building this.
He's going to steal my stuff.
He's going to steal my stuff. I'm in stealth. This is amazing. Why would I do that? And we said, look, the reality is nobody can acquire you if they don't know you exist. I mean, that's just the truth, right? I mean, if they don't know you exist, how do they even find you? So the first thing is they've got to get to know you, and the second thing is you don't have to tell them anything. You don't even have to, tell them as little as you want. But at least you can start the dialogue. They know what you're doing already, even at the highest level. Just go build that relationship, and that ended up becoming a customer. The company became a customer. Then the company said, okay, let's take you to a couple of accounts. And then they finally ended up, pulling the gumption up to actually do the transaction, and it worked out very well for both sides. But that's how those things happen. So I guess it's not always, some of it's about mindset and perspective. You can get into companies lots of different ways. There's lots of people in all these big companies and small companies who are charged with finding great entrepreneurs and great companies to buy, right? And so it's your job to go take advantage of their job titles and go find them, and use your investors to go find them, and use your friends and your networks, but that's part of the job.
So that's actually a good segue into the role of investors in brokering deals and creating opportunities. So you mentioned that you did the introduction in that particular case. Shahin, do you have also similar experiences of helping founders or pointing opportunities to them?
So in the case of Naveen, it was his co-founder's cousin that actually set him up with BK. But I think you should be using every tool that you have at your disposal to create optionality for yourselves. And I think I keep on going back to this, the first target should be people that you're bringing into your company. And with those people, you will do amazing things with very little money, showing that you can punch above your weight. That's going to attract investment. And that's going to attract more people. That will attract more investment. You'll create this virtuous cycle. And then you will suddenly appear on the radar screens of investors like myself, and then soon on the radar screens of corp dev folks as well. So I wouldn't worry too much about finding us. Trust me, we will find you when you're able to achieve those things. Now, that doesn't mean that you should be completely heads down, buried in a basement somewhere, just coding and being completely unaware of the outside world. But it also doesn't mean that you have to be sending blind emails out saying, hello, my name is Shahin, and I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm building an interesting company, you should come meet me. I think it's being networked, being plugged in, and making sure that, again, the message is very concise and clear, and people understand it and are excited about it, and people are flocking towards you, demanding very little with the expectation that you do amazing things, building amazing things, working with you.
Just wanted to build on one point, which I think Shahin said something. I used the word, which is one of my favorite ideas that you guys have to keep top of mind. That's optionality, right? The job of the entrepreneur, the CEO, is not to. I think a lot of people think it's to maximize valuation. But really, valuation most of the time is really a paper exercise, right? I mean, it's not worth anything till it's liquid. So The question is, how do you maximize optionality? Sometimes maximizing valuation minimizes optionality, right? You can certainly see dynamics like that at some of the later stage companies that we all live and live with and know well around the area. So think about that issue: is how do you make sure that you have multiple paths to raise money, to build product, to go to market, for exits? That's your job, because if you maximize optionality, then one of those paths will actually materialize into something. And that's really, really critical. So I think that's really one of the key things to think about. The other thing I would just say is, as you think about raising money, realize that every time you raise money, it's an interesting decision point in the company, right? Every time you raise money, you're doing two things. One is you're setting a new valuation benchmark for exits, because every time somebody sets an enterprise, they're expecting to make money, which changes the dynamics of the board and the investors and the company. So realize that when you raise money, you are setting a new valuation mark that you have to go achieve with. That's one thing. And the second thing is, it's also a point where you should be thinking about decisions. It's actually a decision point. It's not just a fundraising exercise. It's a point where you're making a decision about the future of the business. So that's where optionality should really be acted on, right? What am I worth? What's this business really worth? What am I building here? And those are questions worth asking as you go down that fundraising process. It's a really important point.
So, yeah, talking about that optionality aspect, so within your portfolio, so you have a number of companies go for exits, you have a number of companies probably go for later round financing. How involved are you in the decision process to say, okay, maybe it's a good time to exit, maybe you can do another round, maybe you should try to IPO or M&A, or how does decision happening?
That's it's not necessarily a decision that I make for other people or that the CEO makes for the investors and the employees. It's normally a process. I've had the fortune of not being in a situation where there was contention and debate, and where there was a red camp, black camp, whatever, where some people wanted to stay private and keep raising money and get diluted, and others just wanted to get acquired or go public or an exit. So in all of the situations that I was in, the opportunity that presented itself was pretty attractive. In the case of the therapeutics companies that went public, again, there's a very kind of well understood playbook that when you get to a certain point with an asset, when you have a certain number of partnerships with pharma companies, when you get to that point, then there is public market appetite, and it makes sense to raise money on the public markets and create liquidity for early employees and shareholders. In the case of acquisitions, again, the acquisitions that I've seen were situations where the company was far best situated within the confines of the acquirer, versus remaining as a standalone company. So in those cases, it was obvious. The question that you should ask yourself is, okay, when that opportunity presents itself, is that, will I perform better leveraging the resources of this large company as a unit within this large company, or am I better off being an independent entity? So, in the case of Facebook, when Microsoft offered to buy it, the decision was that no, we're better off as a standalone company, as opposed to operating as a unit of this, rather stodgy old software company. And that was that a good decision? We don't know what would have happened if it were at Facebook, but I would assume that it's better off now versus being at Facebook.
That seems like it.
Yeah, I guess. Look, I think there's the person who decides the path of most of these companies is the CEO. Is a pharma CEO. They're the ones who have all the information that they're integrating from the market and their teams, and they're the decision point. They're the focal point of decisions. Our job as board members and advisors is to help divine what the right answer is. Maybe they're struggling with a decision, and maybe there's some advice we can work through and think through what the paths are. And that's the way I think of my role. I agree. Usually investors say 99% of the decisions are not contentious. They are consensus by process. It's just the way it works out. Now, in that backdrop, you have to realize that cash is your oxygen. So you always have to have, you're always, startups are always burning money. So you've got to always be fundraising, always be thinking about you have the cash. to make that. So fundraising is the critical function that helps you have that decision opportunity, right? The best acquisitions for us in our portfolio, I'm sure it's the same as for you, Shahin, is when acquisition is not the only valve. You can raise money, or you already have a term sheet in hand, or you know that's not going to be, you're flush with cash, and all these. That's when acquisitions are most attractive. If you cut yourself into a situation where that's not going to happen, the best way to play that out is actually not run into the wall at 100 miles an hour, but actually think about it 6 months or 9 months before, when you have a sense of how your business is developing. And that's when your board members and your advisors can help you think through what's really going on with your business. So I think that's the way this happens, and that's the way it should happen. And you've got to sort of keep those thoughts in your mind, right? Raise money, have life, and then see the future a little bit ahead of you. And I think board members can help a lot of that, because we just have seen it, the movie many, many times before, of where companies are in their development and what fundraising looks like, where this company is. So we can help you get to that answer, but it's the entrepreneur's question to answer.
And you guys should look at your board. How many of you have raised venture dollars? Okay, quite a few. Your investors are your partners. They are not your adversaries. You don't answer to them. They don't answer to you. You have to leverage their experience, what they've seen, and say, hey, and keep challenging them. Ask them questions. Don't be afraid to create liabilities for yourselves by engaging with them. Don't be afraid of looking weak. Don't be afraid of looking stupid. I mean, like, it's good to ask questions. I love it when my founders call me and they say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And I say, hey, listen, sometimes I laugh and say, oh, wow, that's ridiculous. I would have made the same mistake if I were you. But I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because here's how I've seen this movie play out. And here's why it may or may not apply to your situation. So view them as partners, and make use of them. Get your equities worth. You're giving them equity in exchange for cash, and they owe you far more than just cash for the equity that they've taken from you.
Yeah, I'm going to make maybe a weird question, being a VC myself, but very often VCs portray themselves as the best friends of entrepreneurs, but there's also situations where there's a bit of a conflict, and that's been mentioned sometimes earlier in other sessions, where the interest in case of an acquisition, the interest of the buyer is to make the founders of their team happy, for them to stay, not necessarily to make their other investors happy. So have you faced situations where you could see somewhat of a conflict of interest with founders or with buyers? Have you seen that?
I've been on both sides of this and actually seen the market go through different cycles. But I would say that, corporate development people in their jobs, and they're trying to think of their jobs a certain way, they can try and minimize the price by creating dissension between investors and founders, right? And that's sort of some way some people do their jobs. I guess what I would say to you is, this is just the way I live my life, forgetting about that discussion, is that essentially life is a repeated game, right? So if that happens and you end up making decisions that don't feel ethically right, or don't feel correct for everybody around the table, or you find yourself in those situations, realize that in the end that information is going to come back to you in different times.
Talking about iterated prisoner's dilemma. Right?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. It's a repeated game. So I think the way I would tell you is, in the end, if there's clarity and clear communication, you've got the communication team from other people as well. If you have open and honest communication, you can get through those kind of discussions, because in the end, that may be the right answer for the company anyway. Right. Whatever the different outcomes may be for different classes of investors, that's something we have to start live with as well and decide it's the right thing for the business. But don't try to do it in ways that don't put everything on the table. Be clear, communicate well, and don't run into the wall at 100 miles an hour. That's the worst. So really try to surface issues earlier, try to understand them well, and then work through those things. And corporate development people, they want to be on the other side of that. If you run into the wall at 100 miles an hour, they can certainly help you. They can certainly help you out of that problem by just buying you for pennies on the dollar, right? So there's ways that you have to manage that.
So I feel like the concept of founder means different things to different people. There is the literal founder of the company, who's the person who incorporates the company, and we have this expectation that for that person who comes up with the idea and incorporates the company is also the person who hires first employees, brings on, doesn't take a paycheck, and is supported by his or her spouse, and sells his or her car, and pays the first few employees with that money, and that's the founder. We as investors and board members have a legal fiduciary responsibility to represent the shareholders of all shareholders. So whether it's the venture capitalists, whether it's the founders, whether it's the employees. Now there are circumstances that arise where the founder's interest, say a founder who owns, let's say, 20% of the common shares, their interest is not aligned with someone who spent 5-6 years at the company earning half the salaries they could have gotten